Hello, welcome to our live iPhone SE review. We are here to talk about Apple's new, cheap, more affordable iPhone. We have Gareth Beavis. Do you want to say hi, Gareth?
Hello, I'm Gareth.
And we have Matt Swider.
Hello,
Hi,
I'm
Matt.
Matt.
Both of these guys have used the iPhone SE, and Gareth's name is on the definitive iPhone SE review that you'll find on TechRadar at the moment. So we are here to talk and answer all of your questions to do with Apple's new affordable phone. I'm in the chat as we speak, so I'm just monitoring anything you want to put down in there. So if you've got any questions for either Matt or Gareth about the new affordable iPhone, be sure to drop them in there. Sorry, I've just seen us all jump up on the actual chat. But in the meantime, I'm going to start asking you some questions. So, Gareth, is
Hello.
the iPhone SE cheap enough?
Is it cheap enough? Yeah, I'm going to say it's a simple answer. Yes, it is. I mean, if Apple ever sold anything for cost, I think we could get a lot cheaper on stuff. But I mean, that's never going to happen. Apple has a natural Apple factor, which not to be too apologist for Apple, but the amount of R&D and marketing and all the kind of stuff that goes on from them to create that kind of brand image is quite a lot of money. So there's always that in there. However, I do feel like the margins for iPhones are always going to be high. So bringing this cheap iPhone out has always been bringing out a cheap in inverted commas iPhone has always been dangerous for Apple, because if you start to bring it out too cheaply, we saw a very similar thing with Windows Phone 5-6 years ago, where the base model of the Nokia Lumia 520 was pretty much as good as the one that cost 3 times as much, apart from the camera and the screen. And everyone just bought the cheap one. Windows Phone really struggled. No one bought the premium. So Apple has to keep a luster for the high end stuff just to keep its profits going. But however, the way they do this by offering arguably the least viable product with the oldest phone back. They couldn't bring back the old iPhone SE 2016 shape because A, probably stopped making it so much, costs more money, and B, it's just too old now. Like, you can't, the screen size is too small for lots of apps. The hardware for battery life, you need bigger frame for more battery. So they did the best they could with the last version they could possibly get away with, and made it the cheapest it's ever been. So I think, yeah, it is cheap enough. It's what people, probably less than people would have expected.
Yeah, cheapest it's ever been is a really important thing here, isn't it? Because if you adjust for inflation, it is the cheapest iPhone ever, which is kind of mad in 2020. Matt, as we were just talking about, it's got the iPhone 8's design. Do you think that's a problem, or is that a fine thing in 2020?
I think that's Apple's biggest solution. So it fits in
Oh,
one
you have
hand
one.
still. So that's
Ooh,
kind of, I do, the red one. Product red.
nice.
It fits in one hand, and that's probably been the thing that people have been clamoring for the most. At least a very vocal minority is trying to, have some decency for your hand, your phone grip, as it were. And I think that is taking that iPhone 8 design. It provides a big enough screen without, maximizing your phone grip. So I think that's really the perfect solution for Apple, and it cuts costs. So that's how you're getting to the $399 cost in the U.S. For example, you can actually get this for under $10 a month through
Crazy,
Apple's
really.
program. So or with the trade-in, it's $229. So this one is going to my parents. My mom was getting product red. My dad's getting white because this is the appropriate iPhone for them. It has a lot of features that we'll get into that they would be used to and acclimated to. But it's that price that they don't need the iPhone, like a max version. They don't need the 11, but it's priced perfectly for them.
Yeah, you've already started comparing it to other phones there, so I'm going to jump into one of the questions we have in the chat, which is from Lakesh Naik, who has asked iPhone or OnePlus. I'm confused in between iPhone or OnePlus, so I'm assuming they mean the OnePlus 8 and whether they should be going for that. Matt, what do you think the things they need to consider are at the moment for that?
I think I usually tell people, what do you have now? Do you like that enough? Is it an Android? Get the Android version. If you are tied to iMessage and iOS, stick with that. If you have a lot of friends who have an iPhone, you will get cut out of group messages. There's certain people who take a chance and go with Android or Apple or iOS if they want to make a switch. a lot of those people spend 1 year with the rival device and go back because they miss certain features. So my best advice is take the usually 14-day return policy very seriously if you're going to switch platforms, and see what you want to do. But it's really what you're accustomed to, because even the keyboard, the virtual, the on-screen keyboard is a little bit different in the second menu when you're looking for the exclamation point, and your muscle memory will go to like, oh, I don't know where anything is. So that's the biggest thing. If somebody has if this person's upgrading from a prior OnePlus 8 is great. But this one gets you iOS on a much smaller, slightly less refined device. The screen has a lot of bezel to it, whereas the OnePlus 8 does not. So you're probably getting decent quality cameras on both. They're comparable, but OnePlus 8 has probably a more future looking design. That's an advantage there if you're looking for that.
Definitely. Gareth, you did the review for TechRadar.
I did.
You did, yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the camera here, because it's a sort of a confusing thing. It's not really, it's not a major spec upgrade, is it? Really, on paper, it doesn't look that exciting, but I think you're a bit more excited about it than the average person.
I wouldn't say I'm excited. I'm I'm closing on 40s now. I don't think excitement comes into my life anymore. But the interesting thing is, right, so what we've been watching from Apple, right, is that since the iPhone 8, actually, the main camera, the one that's sort of the single sensor camera that's being like augmented with an extra sensor for depth, the iPhone 8 Plus, and then we've got this ultra wide sensor and stuff. But the main camera, the normal wide one, seems to have been the same for many versions of the iPhone, because it's had the same megapixels, the same aperture, etc. However, the understanding or the guess was that it was probably being improved somehow as a better sensor, just keeping the same specs, because why would you need to go too much further? However, look, iFixit, the excellent unscrewers who do the teardowns with every model, they found that the iPhone 8 and the iPhone SE cameras are interchangeable, which hints heavily that they are the same model. So they're using the same sensor. Now, I only had the iPhone 8 Plus to hand, but it uses that same sensor. The difference between them is night and day, especially when you're going between night and day, because the color reproduction on the iPhone SE is so much better. The ability to understand low light, it can do algorithmically working out people's faces, so it can do portrait mode off a single sensor. All these things are done entirely off the A13 chipset, we think, which is a massive upgrade. I compared it to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which is the best camera that Apple's ever created on an iPhone. And while it wasn't in the same game, it wasn't in the same ballpark. It was playing the same game, if that makes any sense. So color reproduction wasn't as good, sharpness wasn't as good, depth of field wasn't as good, but it was so much better than it was previously. And the jump with the hardware that Apple's managed is incredible for that reason. You're not going to get the best pictures in the world. For instance, like the portrait mode will always, if there's sort of slightly wispy hair, we'll struggle with that. Most pictures I took, there's always some kind of bit that's slightly off, and then when you go into the stage like mono and all those kind of different effects, you find that it doesn't look as good. However, yeah, the camera for the price again is really strong, and you've got again the App Store, which has a multitude of tweaking options as well.
Great. And as you were talking about, Matt, this is sort of the phone for people that aren't all that fussed about the very top end specs. There, you were talking about this is probably going to your parents. Would you agree from what you've seen from the iPhone SE camera?
Yeah, my mom is going to love this single lens camera. Probably doesn't know that there are dual lens cameras and so forth. She probably sees them on my sister's device and so forth, but she could care less about portrait mode and stuff like that. I think the one feature that
she couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Couldn't.
Could. The one thing that I think people may miss that is on the iPhone 11 series is the night mode. And
Yeah,
that
agreed.
Probably the thing that Apple didn't leave it out, by just chance. It's the thing that you need to upgrade to the iPhone 11 for. And I think that is a game changer for the camera and Apple's camera software. It just takes basically a long exposure to just brighten up any photo, and it happens automatically, which is easier than a lot of Androids that we've seen where you have to go to a dedicated mode. It looks pretty amazing when you
Mm.
are taking a night shot, and all of a sudden it looks like it's going to be a bad shot, and then just the software amps up the brightness
It's a
in
good
very
feeling, isn't it?
smart ways.
Yeah.
I would say that it's an interesting one, that because when I was doing the testing, I kept taking a photo with the 11 Pro Max and then taking the same with the SE and go, oh, they're terribly different. I'm like, oh yeah, night mode, and you have to put it back down again. Then they start to they balance off a bit better, which again hints that the sensors have been upgraded. Because, like I said, unless Apple has specifically just removed it just to be unfair, because otherwise, the the ISP image signal processor is still there for the A13 chipset in both phones or both phone ranges. So therefore, it must be the sensor, hopefully, if Apple hasn't just done it to be mean, is downgraded and can't cope with night mode in the same way, doesn't have the same capabilities. But yeah, night mode is genuinely game changing on the iPhone 11 especially if you're just in the iPhone ecosystem, like you talked about Android there, Matt, just now. Like if you are stuck in iPhone or you want to stay in iPhone, then that you'll notice such a jump forwards. It's incredible.
We've got another question from the chat here from Simrath, who has asked, Apple almost pulled off the iPhone SE2 except for the battery. Why didn't they go for the bigger battery like in the 11 series? Can you talk a little bit about the battery life that you found in the phone, Gareth? Because from your review, it didn't seem to be too bad.
No, I mean, it's not. This is the thing as well. Like, it depends who owns the phone. The iPhone 8 was the flagship phone for like the power user back then. Although actually the iPhone X was arguably that, and the iPhone 8 Plus. So I forget what I just said, but it was a flagship phone. It was at the top of the game, so it was using all the latest components, etc. And people who bought that were more likely to like really intensively use it. And we're doing the same thing. We found that the battery would probably get to like 7, 8, 9 o'clock at the night under normal conditions, and then start to spits out. I'd say the iPhone SE is designed for that, like Matt says, for the parents who maybe don't care as much about technology, or just those that just want a cheap phone and they like the iPhone and they don't really use loads of apps, but they just like iMessage, for instance, like you said, or just some of the AirDrop features. So for those people, they're less likely to use it too much. And I found, you can get 30% by the end of the day if you use it relatively sparingly, which I'd imagine a lot of these people would do. So that's why the battery life isn't as bad. I'm still perplexed, and I haven't found this out. I've done a lot of digging as to why the battery life isn't better, though, because Apple on its website states about the same as the iPhone 8. Now it does have more advanced features in the sense of the chipset's more capable of doing things like the camera, etc. There's a neural engine, all those kind of things working. However, that chipset is supposed to be more efficient. It's 7 nanometers if you're going to get really boring about it, which is just a much more efficient processor. It's using the latest version of iOS, which admittedly the old iPhone 8 is as well. But those are supposed to bring improvements. So I can't work out why the battery isn't slightly better. I really, I haven't even got a conspiracy theory for it. It's sort of there's just no reason, that it should automatically do it. So it makes me realize that if you look at the space, the difference in battery life between the iPhone 11, which is $300 more, and the iPhone SE, it's only the battery size that makes that difference of 2-3 hours for like web browsing and stuff like that, and the battery is about 40% bigger. So it seems to me that battery size is the only thing that can change it. So to the point that you just asked, why not just put a bigger battery in there? Well, the answer is they couldn't, because they were reusing the frames. If you look inside using the iFixit's teardown, there's just no more space to put a battery. It's just not really possible without massively redesigning the battery, finding a whole new shape, and therefore incurring more cost.
Yeah, fair enough. We've got another question from the chat, which I'm going to ask you, Matt. This is from VidCon Fun, who said, why does Apple think smaller doesn't need pro spec? So I think we're talking about like why does the small screen iPhone have to have that lower spec? Why can't there be a 4.7-inch iPhone that can have that top end camera you were talking about with the amazing night?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I would love to hold a smaller phone and have an all-screen display instead of what we have here, which is just bezel-heavy screen. So I would love for that to happen, and there are a lot of concepts out there of people, just fans out there trying to make their own iPhone SE2, which it was rumored to be called that, and it had basically an iPhone, 11 design to it on the front, but it had the smaller size. That never came to happen. And I am with this person who's asking this question because I would love to see that, even if it incurred more cost. So even if it was about $600, I would love a phone that was smaller and had all the specs. That's something that we see on certain Androids as well. Like you mentioned, the OnePlus 8 and the OnePlus 8 Pro. They're not just smaller sizes of each other. The OnePlus 8 Pro has all the features you want, but it's a tall and heavy phone, and that's what we're seeing from smartphones. I think the day we get back to a smaller iPhone is with all the top end features is the day we have a foldable iPhone that kind of folds in half, and then you have a smaller iPhone with the top specs. I don't think that's going to happen before that, unfortunately. But I definitely concur with that question. It's like why can't we have the best that fits in one hand?
So you're waiting for 2026 where we might get a foldable iPhone.
That's about right.
I slightly disagree with the whole idea that the phones aren't small enough. I mean, I agree that they're taller, and so moving your thumb up and down makes a difference. But in terms of width, which I find is the main thing when you're doing handholdiness, is like the iPhone 11, which unfortunately I don't have here, is only sort of like that much more. Like it's less than a centimeter difference.
Some
Like,
science there for you.
science for you guys, yeah, and biology. But it's not that much wider to hold. Like I said, I agree that moving your thumb up and down is irritating, and that does make it create an issue. But the iPhone 11 to me is that phone. Like I know that people want smaller with more specs, but you do get a diminished app experience. You know, like the going from these all-screen iPhones back down to the iPhone SE, which is how it feels. You do feel like things aren't as easy. Even stuff like the photo I want to use on my screen doesn't have as much visibility, so I can't put a picture of me and my girlfriend. I have to make it really small and sort of crop it, and it's like, oh, this is not as nice as it used to be. So I feel like things are getting bigger, and I remember the days when I think it was a 4-inch phone was like, whoa, that's massive, you look like an idiot, and it wasn't that long ago. I think people are naturally going to move forward, so I do think we gain more than we lose by having the phones go larger.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool. If anyone has any more questions, be sure to drop them into the chat, and we will take a look in a minute. Gareth, can we talk a little bit about the screen? I don't think we've spoken all that much about that. Again, that's older tech being used here. Is that a problem?
Firstly, I want to say hello to Jay Squires, one of the fans from the quiz, the OG.
Oh, hey, Jay.
Yeah, good to see you again. Although he disappeared, he got his own questions, disappeared. So if you are watching, please do tune in for the quiz this Thursday evening. We want to see you again. About the screen, difficult one, right? It's what's been tricky as me as a phone reviewer is like in the early days of smartphones, you realize spec was the thing. Like this, what could it do? Oh, it had a 2 megapixel camera, it had full HD screen. These things did make a massive difference. And Apple, especially in the early days, was really lagging behind. Like its camera, I kind of think the first one didn't even have a flash. Like it didn't have 3G. The amount of specs it didn't have were quite difficult. Then around the iPhone 4, we started to see a bit more of a jump forward. We started to see Retina displays. We started to see things like that. And Retina HD, the sort of the sharpness of this screen, where you aren't supposed to be able to see the pixels anymore, is largely true. So I feel at that point, you are getting like a minimum acceptance of what can do. Like having more resolution in a smartphone, having things like 120 hertz scrolling, which is sounds boring to people, but in terms of the smoothness of it, those things do make a big difference if you're in the right situation. Things like 4K don't, but you can get a demonstrable difference by going upwards. However, the iPhone 8 screen is not bad by any means. It could be brighter. I agree with that. I mean, they have OLED screens are definitely much better, but with things like True Tone, which moderates itself depending on the lighting conditions, it is a good looking screen. You never look at it and go, well, this is janky and all over the place and blocky, or there's no problem with it. You see something better and realize there is better out there, but you never feel like you're suffering for what you've got. Apart from in that brightness situation, like I said, there are times when you try to take it in high brightness, the reflection is quite strong, but that's about it.
And that's the same with a lot of other smartphones in
Especially
the world at the
point,
moment.
The screen technology is expensive. There's a part of the reason why the iPhones are so costly is because they have the Pro ones, especially because they have these OLED screens which are beautiful, but they aren't cheap to make.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with the screen necessarily. It's really the size. So if you're going to enjoy something like Netflix on a phone screen of this size, you won't enjoy it as much. It's not going to be the clarity. It's not the pixel count that you're seeing individual pixels and going, I can't take this anymore. It's really, wow, the person next to me has a much bigger screen, or in our cases, we test out phones with big screens, and this is in that respect somewhat of a downgrade in terms of size. So it's the compromise of I have a phone that I can hold in one hand. It's not a compromise when it comes to pixel counts. I think that's just really a game that no one is winning these days over anybody else. So
VidCon Fun in the chat has pointed out that Gareth needs a 100-inch iPhone, so we're trying to get Tim Cook on that as soon as possible. Would you be happy with that, Gareth?
If it's foldable, yeah, you're wicked.
It's going to need to fold a few times to be able to fit in your pocket if it's 100 inches.
It's gonna have to defy physics, admittedly, but because to fold, like folding a piece of paper like 9 times is impossible. Whatever it is, I don't think an iPhone would necessarily do it unless it's like a brick that's that wide.
Yeah. Matt, we've got a question in the chat on from Vegny Boo. Is the mute switch also a screen rotation lock on the iPhone
I
SE?
don't. Yeah, Gareth and I had been discussing that earlier, and uh, from our knowledge, it's not been a thing for a while. I it just set to silent, and I know that users want to customize their phone, but that's not necessarily an Apple thing.
And thanks for answering that question, Kevin, in the chat, who exactly the same time as I started saying that. Someone else jumped in and said the same thing as you there, Matt. So that's really handy.
Yeah.
And Matt, can you also run through really quickly what we said earlier about the OnePlus 8 and versus the iPhone SE? What advice would you give to the average person for that?
Yeah.
You covered it slightly earlier, but so maybe just very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually an article on TechRadar where we do a versus piece with the SE2, which is essentially this phone, versus the OnePlus 8, and it did surprisingly well. It did, really good traffic on TechRadar, and that surprised me because it's an Android and iOS device, but people are making decisions on cheap phones based on what we're saying, which is always a great thing. But it's also, interesting to see that the cheap phones are resonating with a large audience. I would say the OnePlus 8 is one of the better budget models, or high-end budget models for among Android phones. But it has more cutting-edge design, so that's what you're going to get with this. You're getting access to an iOS device, and iMessage. Gareth mentioned AirDrop. It's a feature I love that is not on a lot of Android phones, or there's not something similar to that on Android phones. And I think that is the most appealing thing. You're having the cheapest way to have a new iOS device with the iPhone. So it's more of a software perk.
Can I want to jump back to the old mute rotation question because it was reminding me of something. It was more a feature on iPads, if I remember correctly. But I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, you were able to use in the settings to change between lock and rotation using that button. However, that's been gone for a while. So I was really confused. I'm like, it's never been around. It must be a thing. But yeah, it used to be an option in general settings. It's gone now, unfortunately. Sorry.
Cool. We're pretty much out of questions about the iPhone SE in the chat. Someone has been asking, it's FigCon Fun again, has been asking about how what we think of the new Motorola Edge Plus and the new LG, which was announced today, sort of announced today, half sort of teased. How this is open to either of you guys, but like, I think this compares to phones coming out of LG and Motorola at the moment. That we're talking about phone that's designed from 4 years ago. Is our Motorola and LG in that conversation, in your opinion?
I mean, I'll take the bit about whether LG is a real competitor to the iPhone anymore. The answer is no, and I'm with the question. I don't know who asked this question. I should probably check again. Who asked about LG? It was VidCon Fun again, obviously. Oh, he's asking loads of questions. Great. So yeah, LG lost its way somewhere, and he said 4 or 5 years ago we had a glut of phone manufacturers like HTC, Sony, LG, all making devices that were arguably as good as the best on the market. They were really leading the Androids this and iPhones that charge, and Samsung started to take the lead through 2 reasons: one, marketing budget, but also just by refining the phone and really striking a good balance between making features that were as slick and usable as the iPhone, but maintaining the Android customization. Again, deep pockets will help that. I think that's really the problem. Like, LG's marketing started to fall apart. I mean, the LG G4, the main feature of that was that it had a real leather back, and it's like, come on, guys, like you can do better than that. And the problem was that while these brands were doing really good things, like Sony's often had really good camera phones, but just not very usable ones. LG's made really good camera phones as well. Great screen technology, quite nice designs. I feel like there was very little wrong with them in a vacuum, but the marketing just isn't there. And it's like Huawei. Huawei's wandered in with phones that originally weren't that usable. The user interface was terrible to start with. It wasn't fit for a Western market. Very good for Asia, but not for the Western market. And they refined it. They've got better, but they did that and they gave themselves that chance by just chucking money at it as much as anything else. They were doing so much marketing, so much of getting this in people's faces. People started to hear about that phone that had the good camera. And it does have a good camera, but they started to hear about it, and then it starts to become a thing. In the same way that Google's Pixel line, they made such a big marketing push behind it being a good camera phone. Then that's corroborated by the reviews, and then it starts to create some groundswell. LG HTC just didn't do the same kind of thing, so it's a shame because LG. I've been to the manufacturing plants. I've spoken to a lot of key executives there. They know what they're doing on a kind of an engineering level. It's just it doesn't quite come together in a comprehensive package, and it's a shame because the LG G2, I know we're going back, was a brilliant phone. It was a really big step forward. It had a button on the back as the power button. It was a really clever thing to do. The camera was good, and you feel like you wish there were more people vying for the top spot right now.
Yeah, I will say that same thing about LG. They took a lot of bets, and they had phones that curved. They had, the leather back. They had the LG G5, which was responding. Yeah, it was responding to people who wanted a more modular phone. You could take the battery out, which was something that was waning in existence at the time. But took a lot of bets, which was interesting. I applaud that, but they made a lot of wrong bets, and that is unfortunate for them. So as much as I really dig seeing that, Samsung stuck to its guns, and it just went after the camera, design, screen, everything, like the main tenets of a smartphone. And they refined that. LG took a lot of chances, and kind of every time they said this is the defining feature, and the next year that feature would disappear from the next version of the phone, and they would have a different feature, and that just didn't work out. And one thing I will say, visiting LG at one point in Seoul, I think they got caught up in what a lot of manufacturers get caught up in. I know two specifically did, and it was LG and then the Essential phone. In LG's case, we asked a question and said, hey, why isn't the camera better? They had a smaller sensor in their camera. And the head of the camera department said, sheepishly said, well, the design team won. And the desire for a thinner phone meant that they had a worse camera, and that bore out into what we see today. With Motorola finally has a flagship device again. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what we have in our full review coming up for the Motorola Edge Plus. So stay tuned for that.
See, I mean, that debate between engineering and design is one that rages in every single brand. It's not a small thing. Like they will come up with a concept at the head, at the top of the chain, and they'll tell them to go and make it, and it's just a fight, right? And you look at brands like Huawei and Honor. We've been there, we've spoken to them, and you can see that it's engineering that will win out nearly all the time because they're like, we want this is going to happen, and then design team will go off and have to try and keep doing it. However, it's a good thing to focus on design because how a phone feels in your hand is massively important. And I feel like, again, and I can't say this for certain, like LG is not a company with inadequate resources. It does have some good strength. It's one of the world's biggest electronics manufacturers. But you just feel like, okay, you can imagine in Apple, they would say, well, go away and find a way of making this work. Like, this is what we're trying to achieve, make this work. And instead of hitting a sort of a brick wall, it's difficult, like I said, because HTC, you can imagine that happening because it was a smaller brand in terms of phones. But LG obviously has big sway, and we've seen it. They pull together cameras and imaging and display and all that kind of stuff that does really well. But you just feel like there shouldn't be someone winning and someone losing. It should always be a good compromise that happens. And if someone loses, then yeah, you're right. They've made a bet, and that bet doesn't always pay off.
Yep.
Fair enough. Is there anything else that either of you want to talk about on the iPhone SE? Is there any closing statements?
I think the home button is really important to touch on, the Touch ID home button, as it were.
You're too proud of that, Matt. The big smile on your face then.
Exactly. You really telegraphed it was coming, I'll be honest.
Brilliant segue. Thank you. So I do love that. Not only for my parents who are accustomed to that, and that's the one reason I held them at, like, I helped them make decisions about the technology that they use. My mom is on an iPhone 6, which isn't even compatible with the Apple Watch she got for Christmas, and my dad is on an iPhone
Does she
7.
want this stuff that you're giving them?
No, it's forced. It's forced upon my parents. They don't. They don't. Yeah. So, but for she has like a battery that will die if she takes it out of the house for too long. So that is, why spend like $50 on a battery upgrade when you can just have a phone for a little bit more, because we're turning in the old phone and doing the trade in program. Um, it's great for them, the Touch ID home button, but it's also fit for people who are struggling with Face ID and are wearing masks, for example. And if that's a trend
Mm.
going forward, it's something that when I've been testing this out, I love that feature. Whereas I switch back to my iPhone 11 Pro Max, and I'm struggling using it, especially when I'm using Apple Pay, and I have to go to a Dwayne Reed's or a Walgreens in the U.S. And I try to use it, and you have to use it twice. Once for Apple has a great feature where it loads your loyalty card on there, so you use it for a loyalty card, and then the person at the cash register has to press the button again, and then you use it to pay for something. Twice, I have to use it twice in a row, and Face ID has to fail before I can type in the passcode twice. So that is something that I've really appreciated this in the past week.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have found it quite irritating using Touch ID again. I appreciate the point about the face masks. I was just actually quickly looking, because I should have probably known this straight away. But with Face ID, I'm sure there was a learning feature with certain parts of the face being covered previously, but I'm not certain on that. It may be that you couldn't do it. I do feel like, while we absolutely should respect the whole situation right now, and obviously everyone is, and having face masks and stuff might be part of our lives for a few months, it's not gonna be forever. And I find Face ID is a much more robust way of getting into my phone than Touch ID. Even just, I forgot about wet fingers. I have wet fingers far more than I think I do. And the amount of times I'm having to just go off and just oh, wet my finger, I've done it again. Like make a lot of tea. You know, enjoy a good bath. All these things that make it
Washing your
hard.
hands for 20 seconds.
Pardon?
Washing your hands for 20 seconds.
Of course, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's actually true. That is actually
Yeah.
part of the problem. But yeah, so I find Touch ID isn't quite as accurate as, the muscle memory of holding your phone in the right place is slightly better than it is using Touch ID. However, I do appreciate that, a finger is quite useful to pop in when you want to try and get a home button working. So that's useful too. But yeah, the whole Face ID versus Touch ID, I still feel like we've gone the right way.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's everything for our live iPhone SE 2020 review. Thank you for joining us. If you've got any more questions, be sure to drop them in the chat and we'll reply to you in a minute. John McCann, some guy called John McCann, has just asked something about whether Apple will bring Touch ID under the screen in an iPhone.